there's a lot of these kind of comments about presidential immunity. This account here, Benny Bronco, Obama has presidential immunity thanks to SCOTUS. And this one, oh no, this risk to Obama. This was before the Supreme Court ruled in Trump's favor regarding immunity. Obama is off limits for the same reason. Now, everyone else is fair game. Presidential immunity is specific to the president, but Obama is safe on the basis of presidential immunity. The answer is, nope, absolutely not. Even under Trump v. U.S., the Supreme Court decision that found presidential immunity for Trump, because immunity is only ever, in this political context, for official acts within the scope of an official's official capacity, whether that be a judge, whether that be a cop, whether that be a prosecutor, or whether that be president of the United States. If a judge decides to go out and commit a bank robbery, they have immunity for their decisions as judges in their courtroom. But if they decide to go out and rob a bank, they don't have immunity for robbing a bank. Robbing a bank has nothing to do with being a judge. It's just a crime. And the same is true of presidents. Now, in Trump v. U.S., the Supreme Court decision from just last year, the Supreme Court tossed out a bunch of charges against Trump, charges based on conduct during his presidency. There was an indictment that alleged that after losing the election in 2020, he conspired to overturn it by spreading knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the collecting, counting, and certifying of the election results. This is the stolen election, of course. Trump had moved the district court to throw out the indictment on the grounds that he had presidential immunity. The district court refused. Trump went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court held, under our constitutional structure of separated powers, there's a Article 1 legislative branch, an Article 2 executive branch, an Article 3 judicial branch. The nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecutions for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority, which could well be arguing that an election was stolen. And he is entitled to at least a presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts, one of which would be making sure that as the chief executive officer of the U.S., that the execution of a federal election was legitimate. But the Supreme Court also said there is no immunity for unofficial acts. Well, perhaps the greatest, most unofficial act any government official could engage in is treason and sedition. The presidential immunity is a grant of immunity to the president for conduct which could arguably be in support of his governmental responsibilities to faithfully execute the laws of the United States in the case of the president. Immunity cannot possibly apply in any manner to treason, which is an act against the state. The state cannot grant immunity for an effort to kill the state, for a conspiracy to engage in sedition against the state itself. That would be like me granting permission to kill me. That's not a thing. Obviously, treason cannot be an official act. Sedition cannot be an official act of a president. So there can be no presidential immunity for Obama on charges of treason and seditious conspiracy. Now, maybe the charges will be unproven, but he's not immune from prosecution. He's subject to prosecution just like anybody else. And of course, presidential immunity would never apply to anyone except the president. So it doesn't help any of these other people who helped, who conspired with President Obama. So no immunity for Obama on these charges. Now, what about the statute of limitations? I hear all kinds of talk about the statute of limitations. So let's take a look at some of these charges. They're all pretty concise, by the way. Let me hit this super chat before. Oh, it's a new member. Phil, you're a new member. I thought you were already a member. You're a member again? All right. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it. All right, let's take a look at one of the prospective charges that could be brought here. Treason. 18 USC 2381. Whoever owing allegiance to the United States. Oh, by the way, that's a funny issue right there, right? The first few words. I saw a very funny meme and I lost it. I tried to find it again for today's show, but I couldn't find it. It's a picture of Obama looking in the camera and he's saying, treason? You don't even know if I'm an American citizen. And the truth is, we don't know if he's an American citizen. We honestly don't. I know it's supposed to be a conspiracy theory about his so-called birth certificate. We never had a legitimate birth certificate from him. We had something printed up at a hospital in Hawaii, certificate of live birth. That wasn't produced contemporaneous with his birth. That's just a document somebody laser printed. They could do that for anybody. They could do that for Donald Duck. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. If he had a birth certificate, why wouldn't he have produced it the moment there was any public question about his citizenship, whether or not he was a natural-born citizen? Why did he wait years to produce this synthesized certificate of live birth? Obviously not printed contemporaneously with his birth. It's crazy. Obvious fabrication. So, of course, if it turns out maybe Barack Obama's legal defense to treason, which does carry a punishment of execution, maybe his legal defense will be, guess what? I'm not actually an American citizen. Fooled you. Fooled you. Because if he wasn't an American citizen, he can't be tried for treason. Because one of the elements of treason is that you owed an allegiance to the United States. Whoever owing allegiance to the United States levies war against them. So a lot of people are saying, well, treason requires war. That's not true. That's one of the conditions. If you levy war against the United States, that would be an act of treason, or adheres to America's enemies, giving them aid and comfort. And remember, the president and all these other officials, when they were sworn in, they took an oath to preserve and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So this applies, adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. That applies to domestic enemies of the U.S. government too. Is guilty of treason and shall suffer death. So this is a crime punishable by death, by capital punishment, or a minimum of 5 years and a fine, and they shall be incapable of holding office. So on the charge of treason, has the statute of limitations expired? Now, I'll explain that for, see, I think I have that statute too. By the way, the fact that you don't have to be levying war to suffer capital punishment for treason, be convicted of treason and executed. This guy, William Bruce Mumford, I believe it was 1862. The U.S. Navy came into during the Civil War. The U.S. Navy came into New Orleans, and they were negotiating for the city to surrender. And while they were doing that, one of the officers on one of the U.S. Navy ships sent a couple guys on shore to pull down the Confederate flag and put up the U.S. flag. Now, the city had not yet surrendered. It was still Confederate territory. But they sent a couple guys in early and put up an American flag. And this guy tore down the flag. He didn't attack anybody. He didn't fire a gun, didn't fire a cannon, didn't use violence against any person. He just tore down the American flag that they had just put up. And when they saw him from a ship tearing down the flag, they fired a cannon at him, and he got injured by a piece of brick, and he got arrested. Well, not right away. He tore down the flag, and then he walked around with it for a while. Eventually, the city did give up. It surrendered, and the North took over. And after they took over, they found this guy, and they charged him with treason. How much force did he use in his act of treason? He just tore a flag off a flagpole. That was it. That's all that was required. They tried him for treason. They convicted him of treason, and they hung him until he was dead. That's all that was required. the tearing down of a piece of cloth. So everyone who you see on the left is saying, oh, no, yeah, treason only applies for acts of war. Tearing down a flag is enough. You think a multi-months organized conspiracy to take down the duly elected president of the United States would be sufficient if tearing down a flag is sufficient? So what about the statute of limitations? Now, most federal crimes, I will tell you, most federal crimes have a 5-year statute of limitations. And that clock starts running when the crime is committed. So you rob a bank, that's a federal crime, assuming the bank has a federal relationship, which they almost all do these days. You rob a bank, it's a federal crime. They have to begin prosecuting you within 5 years. Once the statute of limitations is run, you're not subject to prosecution anymore. And statute of limitations are a good public policy because we all know from life experience that, if enough time goes by, witnesses' memories fade, evidence becomes corrupted. It's just more difficult to have confidence in the legitimacy of a conviction after a certain number of years. So we pick different periods of time for statutes of limitations for different purposes, civil suits, criminal offenses, and most federal crimes are 5 years. Well, it's been more than 5 years since these specific acts we've been talking about occurred, right? A lot of them occurred December 2016, 9 years ago, more than 5 years ago. So does that mean this is all past the statute of limitations? Because there's a lot of people on social media arguing that that's the case. This all happened more than 5 years ago. Well, not for treason. For treason, there is no statute of limitations. The statute of limitations is infinity years. And that's because under federal law, any crime for which capital punishment is a prospective sentence can be found, meaning started, at any time without limitation. So there is no statute of limitation for any federal crime that carries as a possible punishment execution. So there's no statute of limitation on treason. So anybody charged with treason telling you that, oh, no, it's too late, the statute of limitations is run on that, they just don't know what they're talking about. There cannot be an expired statute of limitations on the charge of treason. Now, what about this other charge they're talking about, sedition, or more properly, conspiracy of sedition? Now, again, for most federal crimes that are not subject to capital punishment. So here we have offenses. This is USC 3282, 18 USC 3282. Offenses that are not capital offenses, except as otherwise provided by law, no person shall be prosecuted, tried, or punished for any offense, not a capital offense, which treason is, unless the indictment is found, meaning handed in, or the information is instituted within 5 years after such offense shall have been committed. Now, there are exceptions to this beyond the capital offense crimes, like treason. There are some financial crimes. There are some crimes of a sexual nature that are explicitly excluded from this 5-year statute of limitations. Some of them, for example, the clock doesn't start ticking until the crime, like the theft, is discovered, if it's a financial theft crime. Not from when the theft occurred, but from when the loss of the money is discovered, which could be years after the theft occurred. But absent a specific exemption from this presumptive 5-year statute of limitations, all the federal crimes are 5-year statute of limitations. And again, we're past 5 years here, aren't we? For most of this stuff, we're past 5 years. And the crime of insurrection is a specific federal crime that carries a 5-year statute of limitations. It's not subject to capital punishment, and it's not one of the specific exceptions to the presumptive 5-year statute of limitations rule. So insurrection carries a 5-year statute of limitations, and we're past 5 years. So you can't charge any of these people with insurrection, which is why there's so much talk about seditious conspiracy here. Because in that phrase, seditious conspiracy, we have sedition, which is really a form of insurrection, but more importantly, we have conspiracy. And conspiracy is a very interesting area of the law. And it's treated rather differently than an individual who attempts to commit a crime, because a conspiracy is a collection of people who are working together in a collaborative way to commit a crime. That is the nature of the conspiracy. And they have to do, really, there's two parts to a conspiracy. You have to all agree collectively to commit this crime, or the broad nature of the crime. And you have to take some affirmative step to do it. So say you were conspiring to rob a bank. You have to all agree to rob the bank, but that enough is not by itself sufficient to be a criminal conspiracy to rob a bank. You have to take some affirmative step. You have to case the bank. You have to acquire the guns. You have to figure out how to neutralize the alarm system. You have to arrange for a getaway car. Some affirmative step in advancement of the conspiracy. Doesn't need to be much, but it needs to be more than nothing. But here's the thing. Once you've done that, once you've brought the conspiracy into legal being, you've all agreed, and you've taken an affirmative step, that conspiracy now is an ongoing criminal activity. It survives as long as the conspiracy is in existence. And people can wander in and out of that conspiracy, be active participants in the conspiracy. You might start at the beginning, and then you might drop out, and other people might come in the middle, and they stay till the end. Some people come in at the last minute. And so each of their individual participations may have kind of a begin and end date, but the conspiracy itself is ongoing. It continues to go until the last affirmative step is taken, the last effort to continue the conspiracy. Once you have the last effort to continue the conspiracy, then the statute of limitations clock begins to run. So the statute of limitations 5-year clock doesn't run from the initial agreement to engage in the conspiracy, which might well have occurred in 2016. That clock doesn't even begin to tick until the last person has done the last part of the conspiracy, which I would suggest may not even have been done yet. I mean, certainly, for example, I would suggest that the raid on Mar-a-Lago was credibly an advancement of this conspiracy, that the Garland, the people who engaged in that raid on Mar-a-Lago, seized all those documents from Trump's residence, were looking to seize evidence of their own conspiracy to prevent it from being made public. That would clearly be an advancement of the conspiracy. That was 2022, August 2022. So that was less than 3 years ago, well within the statute of limitations. And by the way, to the extent that any of these conspirators are still making news appearances, still propagating lies about this, that's also advancement of the conspiracy. If they did that today on the Sunday talk shows, if Clapper was on the Sunday talk shows, if Comey was on the Sunday news shows today, the conspiracy is still ongoing. The statute of limitations clock, that 5-year clock, has not even yet begun to tick. So statute of limitations, while it may time out for insurrection, it will not have timed out, almost certainly, for this seditious conspiracy. And there's a lot of people involved in this conspiracy. And certainly Tulsi Gabbard is talking about it, right? She writes, these documents detail a treasonous conspiracy by officials at the highest level of the Obama White House. So because this conspiracy continues until the last affirmative act on behalf of the conspiracy, if a conspiracy is over a 10-year period and you came into the conspiracy on day 1 and you left on day 2, the last part you ever did with the conspiracy was day 2, you are still a conspirator 10 years later, because you are legally part of the conspiracy for as long as that conspiracy exists. So all these people at the highest levels of the Obama White House, they might say, hey, the last time I even talked about this stuff was 2019. That's more than 5 years ago. Doesn't matter. If there are other conspirators still advancing the conspiracy, you're still one of the conspirators. You're still on the hook. You don't have an individual statute of limitations clock ticking. The statute of limitations clock that applies is to the conspiracy generally. So you could have done your last thing in 2019 and you're still on the hook within the scope of the statute of limitations because the conspiracy is still ongoing. Arguably was ongoing in 2022, maybe still is today. The only way to escape that would be to withdraw as a conspirator. I'll talk about that more in a moment. Stephen Miller here. Gabbard has exposed the startling depth of a seditious coup against the Republic. So we have sedition and we have Tulsi Gabbard just talking about conspiracy. The goal was to usurp President Trump and subvert the will of the American people. No matter how powerful, every person involved in this, and here it is again, conspiracy. Conspiracy is very important here because it's what prevents everyone from simply being able to claim that they're free and clear based on the statute of limitations. And it certainly has the feeling of a conspiracy, doesn't it? I mean, again, I don't want to get into all the documents released by Gabbard today, but this was one of them that I think is really notable because it just stinks. It stinks of conspiracy. This was an email that Susan Rice, an Obama official, she sent this email to herself from Susan Rice to Susan Rice. And what does it say? It's a whole list of a bunch of people who were at a meeting. Susan Rice was there. Comey was there. Obama was there. And what they're doing is they're documenting how they're all good people and we're definitely not doing anything unlawful. We're all proceeding by the book. We're all following the law. We just want to send ourselves this email memorializing the fact that we're all following the law and doing it by the book. No conspiracy happening here. I mean, it just reeks of conspiracy. And here's some, because this is the Attorney Anna Branca show, we have some actual law on this. The statute of limitations for conspiracy. This is from the Department of Justice Criminal Resource Manual, guidance for their Department of Justice attorneys. Conspiracy is a continuing offense for statutes that require an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy to bring it into being, which would apply here. The statute of limitations begins to run on the date of the last overt act, which could be 20 years later if the conspiracy is ongoing for that long. Now, there is a way to escape that. If you're one of the conspirators and you don't want to be on the hook for as long as the conspiracy lasts, you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? How did I get myself involved in this conspiracy? I want to escape. I don't want to be on the hook 20 years from now within the statute of limitations if the conspiracy goes that long. There is a way to do that. You can eject from the conspiracy. You can legally withdraw from the conspiracy. But that withdrawal means more than simply stopping participating. It means more than simply no longer being involved. You have to affirmatively go to the authorities and say, hey, I was previously involved in this conspiracy, but now I want you to know I'm out of it. That withdraws you from the conspiracy, and that starts the 5-year statute of limitations clock for you. If after you do that, you give notice to the authorities about your withdrawal from the conspiracy, 5 years later, you're clear under the statute of limitations. An individual's withdrawal from the conspiracy starts the statute of limitations running for that individual. So you can do that. But withdrawal from a conspiracy for this purpose means that the conspirator must take affirmative action by making a clean breast to the authorities or communicating his or her dissociation to the other conspirators. It's not just no longer being involved in the enterprise. Here's a shipwrecked crew, former federal prosecutor. Definitely you should follow him on X. He's very knowledgeable about this stuff. And he was also a big criminal defense attorney for many of the January 6th protesters. He writes, if a conspiracy can be charged, the fact that you might not have done anything in the past 5 years does not mean you're beyond the statute of limitations for your participation while you were involved. You have to withdraw. And withdrawal from an ongoing conspiracy is particularly defined if you did not act in a way that establishes effective withdrawal under the law, you remain subject to prosecution for your involvement, even if that involvement was more than 5 years ago. The 5-year clock starts from the last overt act by anybody, any conspirator, not when you stop participating. And that's to address this complaint here. Brian Cunningham writes, "Hey, dummies, no senior Obama official served in government after January 27th, 2017. 2017 plus 5 years equals 2022. Even if they had done anything illegal, the statute of limitation has run, period." Again, and good logic, my friend Joe Neerman, follow him, the following pro. He's making this point. The raid in Mar-a-Lago took place in 2022. That if that was an overt act and advancement of the conspiracy, then everyone involved in the conspiracy who did not effectively withdraw from the conspiracy is still involved in the conspiracy. They're not just cut loose because they've been quiet. If Mar-a-Lago was an overt act on the part of the conspiracy, even if it was the last one, that 5-year statute of limitations clock just started running August 2022, when that Mar-a-Lago raid took place, which is less than 5 years ago. Thanks for watching this highlight segment of our full-length Law of Self-Defense live stream. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to give us a like and subscribe for more expert analysis on politics, law, and how to be hard to convict. And to watch the full-length episode of this show, just click right here. Stay safe.